Hello and welcome back. In this section, we're going to be using channels for luminosity blending. Now, channels are basically the different color channels in your images. So for an RGB image, for instance, your color channels are going to be R, G, and B, red, green, and blue. And with these three channels in combination with each other, they can actually make any color in your image. And this is actually how displays work as well. So for instance, if you were to take a magnifying glass to an LED display, you would see a little red, green, and blue LED. And depending on the brightness of each of those three, you can actually make different colors. If you ever want to get really close to your television at home, you'll actually see like a little band of red, green, and blue. So kind of the same thing here. Red, green, and blue for an RGB image make up our image itself, and that's what we're going to be working on here, the different color channels. Now, the idea here is that each of these different channels contains a little bit different information, and that you can use this information to make selections, and then those selections will allow you to luminosity blend. Alrighty, we got a great section. Let's get into Photoshop. So here in Photoshop, we're going to our sample images. We're in Chapter 2, Section 3. Let's go ahead and open up channels.jpg. We'll hit open and hit F for full screen. Now, this image does look great. It's just a little bit dark here, especially in like this area here, this area, and the water. So I do want to brighten up those dark areas, but I don't want to affect my lights. As you know by now, you could use blend if sliders to do this. You could use apply image to do this. And now we're going to show you how to use channels to do this as well. So let's go ahead and take a look at our channels dialog. Go ahead, go to Window and down to Channels. And here we can see, if I click on RGB, this is just a combination of our red, green, and blue. So just your image there. Let's click on our red channel, green channel, and blue channel and see that they each change just a little bit depending on the information in the image. For instance, in our red channel, you can see that like this area here in our sky is a little bit dark. Okay, meaning that there's not a lot of red in this area. If I go to my blue channel, you can see it gets much, much lighter, basically telling me that there's more blue in that area. So where channels kind of give you a little bit different options from your apply image and from blend if, is that you can use light information from the different color channels to then affect your luminosity blending. For instance, if I wanted this area, like the dark rocks here, to be just a little bit lighter, I'm going to take a look at my red, green, and blue channel and see which color channel actually contains more information. And it looks like, in this case, the red channel contains a little bit more. You can see how these darks are a little bit darker here in the blue and the green channel. The red channel, that information is just a little bit lighter. So I can use the red channel to pull more information back into my photograph. So to convert these channels in a format we can actually use to affect our image, we first want to convert them into selections. So let's go ahead and turn this into a selection. Now, back in Photoshop, all I have to do to turn any of these color channels into a selection is hold Control or Command. You can see as I hover over the thumbnail, we have a little selection preview icon. Simply hold Control or Command and click right there on the channel, and that's going to turn it into a selection. Now, when you select a channel, it selects the light areas more than the dark areas. Okay? So for instance, like this white cloud, that's going to basically be 100% selected. Okay? This like really dark area down here, that's basically going to be 0% selected. And then anything gray is going to be selected based on the light level. So this will be a little bit more selected. Down here will be a little bit less selected. So let's go ahead back to our layers. I'm going to create a new layer and we'll just kind of show you how this works. So now that we have a new layer, let's go to Edit and down to Fill. And let's just fill this with a color here. Let's just choose like a nice color just so we can see what we're doing here. Okay, and let's hit OK. There we go. Control or Command D to deselect. Okay, and here's what we have. Now, I can actually turn my background layer invisible and see what filled on this layer. So this layer, again, we made a selection of my red channel. Okay, Now going back to this layer, we just filled that selection with this red color. So this is actually what's on the layer itself. You can see it selects mostly the light areas, okay? Remember the cloud was pretty much white, and it doesn't select the dark areas nearly as much. Let's go ahead and grab, I'm going to put a solid color fill layer. Let's just put a black layer right underneath this red layer, and we can see, there we go. So this red layer, again, if I turn the black off, you can see the red layer is just filled with red with transparent pixels where it's not selected. Now here, when you see the black layer under it, you can see how much information you actually get. Because we made a selection from the image itself, it contains all of the information of the image. So this is not a crude selection, okay? This is not nearly the same thing as, for instance, grabbing like a marquee selection and then filling that with this color, okay? Like, this is what I would consider like a crude selection, okay? It's just like selected or not selected. Selections from channels are extremely fine detail. They contain all the detail of your image itself. So you can see I can turn this off and on, I can move it around, do all kinds of fun stuff. Now let's go ahead and turn my background layer on. I'm going to just turn this black layer off temporarily, and we can see that in fact this did select the lighter areas, but again we have all the gradients of our image itself. So you can see in areas like down here, it's showing up in the lighter areas of the pool, okay, and not necessarily in the darker areas. So this is basically affecting the lighter areas. Now, let's say we want to affect the darker areas. Let's go ahead and make this layer invisible. We'll go back to our channels, take a look at our red channel. We'll just turn this into a selection again. Okay, again, I'm just kind of want to get you to know how channels work, and then we're going to start to use them for luminosity blending. So let's turn it back into a selection. You can hold Control or Command and click to make it a selection. Okay, you can also just go right down here to this circle made as a bunch of dots. It's a dot circle. Click there, and that'll make it a selection too. So either way, Control or Command, click on the thumbnail, or click on this icon here. So it's a selection now, and every time you make a selection from a channel, it's going to select the lights. So if you want to wind up affecting your darks, what you want to do is inverse your selection. So we'll go to Select and then down to Inverse, and now it's affecting the darks. So if I make a new layer, let's hit Shift Delete, and we'll fill this with a color. Okay, and this time let's fill with a dark blue color. There we go. Let's go a little bit darker because they are my darks. We'll hit OK and hit OK. There we go. Now hit Control or Command D to deselect. Now you can see these are in fact the darks of my image. Okay, so let's just create a color fill. There we go. We'll create a white layer right here. So this white is basically, it's just pure white, and then we add from the darks, and then you can see these are basically the darks of my image. Now I can put this red layer on over top, and this is the lights of my image. So obviously if you combine the lights and the darks, you make up the entire image. So if you want to select just the lights, just go ahead and make a selection of a channel. If you want to select the darks, select and then inverse that selection. This is kind of where it begins. We have a few more options from here because we don't have to take the channels just as they are. For instance, if we want to enhance the lights and darks with the channels, we can do that as well. So let's go ahead and make these layers invisible. We'll go back to our channels here, and now let's take a look at our red channel, but instead of just kind of using it as it is, I want to enhance it a little bit more. For instance, maybe I want a little bit more information here in my shadows. So what we're going to do is actually duplicate this channel. Let's click and drag from the red. We'll go down to this new layer icon, and you can see we have a red copy. So just click and drag right down to this guy, and then you can see we have a red copy. Now, once we have our red copy, I can use a levels adjustment right here on this red copy. So let's hit Control or Command L for our levels. Now this is not an adjustment layer. Keep in mind, if you go to Layer, down to new adjustment layer. These are adjustment layers here, okay? And these will actually create in your layers dialog. What I'm doing is going to image and then adjustments and then levels here. So this will apply a levels adjustment onto the channel itself, not create an adjustment layer. It's a little bit confusing. Photoshop has adjustments and adjustment layers. In this case, you want to just use a adjustment. And again, the easiest way to do this is just hit Control or Command L, and then there we go. You're going to affect the levels of this channel copy. In this case, I want to make this area a little bit brighter. So let's just take our white point. We're going to make it a little bit brighter. There we go. And that looks pretty good. So let's hit OK now. And we have kind of its own thing. And I created this as a little bit brighter for this information down here. Like I want to get more information right down here in this part of my photograph. That's why I went ahead and made it a little bit brighter. Now at this point, there's a super important thing to note. If you do edit your channels with levels or curves, always be sure to make a copy first. If you don't make a copy, it's going to wind up affecting the image itself, which you don't want to do, okay? So anytime you make any changes to your levels, always make a copy. So you can see here, first we made a red copy, and then I applied my levels, okay? Super important there. Okay, now that we have our red copy, I can hit Control or Command and make a selection. There we go. And again, it's going to select the lighter areas. So anything that's not 100% black gets selected. So this area, for instance, will get selected. So let's go back to my layers. And now we can do some fun things. For instance, let's go ahead and create a curves adjustment layer. We'll go to Layer, down to New Adjustment Layer, and over to Curves. Let's hit OK. And here we can see, let's go ahead and take a look at our layer mask here. When you have a selection active, any kind of selection, you could use the marquee tool, the lasso tool, channels, whatever. Anytime you have a selection active and you make an adjustment layer, the selection will automatically go into that layer mask. So we can see the layer mask here for the curves. If I hold Alt or Option and click, this is what the layer mask looks like, okay? So when you hold Alt or Option and click on a layer mask, it gives you a preview of the layer mask. So this is the layer mask for this curves adjustment layer. And now what we know about layer masks is it's going to be visible in the lighter areas and not visible in the darker areas. Okay, so let's go ahead and double click right here. There we go. And I'm going to make this just a little bit brighter. So we're making, in this case, the brights, we're making a little bit brighter. Okay? I can make them a little bit darker if I decide to do that as well. Now I can always click on my layer mask and invert it. If I hit Control or Command I, I'm going to invert my layer mask. And then if I make this brighter, you're going to see it's actually going to make my darks brighter, and it's going to leave my lights alone. Okay? So this is actually a really nice place to start. In general for this photograph, I want my darks to be a little bit brighter. So that actually looks pretty good. Let's hold Alt or Option and look at our layer mask. So this is the layer mask now. We can see that my sky is dark, meaning that it's not going to get affected. And down here, this area is a little bit lighter, which means it will get affected. So let's hold Alt or Option and click on that again. So very simply, I'm able to simply brighten up those dark areas of my photograph using this curves adjustment layer. Now, when I did that, all right, we have a lot of information that's come back, but you know, down here, now we've made our darks a little bit brighter, okay, which looks good, but you can see the brights are now not really that bright in comparison, right? Here we have a nice contrast, but when we do this, the contrast is kind of gone. So my suggestion is, if you make your darks brighter, make your lights brighter as well. But you want to do those two separately so you have control of where your dark levels are and your light levels. So let's go ahead and work on the light levels. We're going to work kind of in the pool where the waterfall is. We'll just make this layer invisible for now. We'll go back to our channels and take a look at our different color channels. And I want to find the one that has the most contrast here in this area. Red, green, or blue. You can see blue has very little contrast, green has a little bit more, and red has even more. Okay, so let's go ahead and duplicate our red channel. I'm going to hit Controller Command L. We're going to make our lights a little bit lighter, and we'll bring our midpoint in too. So this way I'm able to actually really hone in that contrast. Let's hit OK. And again, I'm focusing mostly on this waterfall area. So keeping in mind that the lighter areas will get selected. And then with that selection, we can do whatever we want. So these lighter areas are going to get selected. So I built in a little bit of contrast to these lighter areas. Now it's time to go ahead and make them a selection. So let's hold Control or Command and click on that layer, and click on channels. So Control or Command, click on this channel here. It's going to make it a selection. Now let's go back to our layers. Okay, let's go ahead and turn that curves on. I'm going to create a new curves adjustment layer. And this is going to be for the highlights in this little pool. Again, anytime you make a selection and then you make an adjustment layer, that selection automatically loads into the adjustment layer. So just like we have here, we can see we made a selection with our channels. You can see we made a selection with this red copy too, right there. And now on my mask, you can see it pretty much looks the same. So let's go ahead and make this a little bit brighter. And you can see I'm able to adjust the brightness. You can see I could make it darker if I wanted. Ooh, that is a spooky looking sky we just made. Didn't expect that. Okay, but here you can see I'm making it a little bit brighter, and I can affect the bright levels of just those highlights in the water. There we go. And remember, I used a channel that actually gave me contrast. So now we go from this, which is really not too contrasty. We've added some contrast there and some definition. Okay, now the next thing we want to take a look at here, because when you make a selection from your channels, let's just go back to the red copy too. Okay, I really honed it in just right for my waterfall area and this little pool down here. Okay, that's what I was paying attention to. Now, because it's just part of this image, my sky, especially this cloud and things like that, they're going to get selected, and that's way too bright, right? But that's not a big deal because we're just working on a layer mask, and we can change a layer mask at any time. So this area looks good. This area, not so much. So how do we take care of that with our image itself? So back on my curves adjustment layer, let's just take a look at our layer mask. I'm going to hold Alt or Option and click on my layer mask. Again, my layer mask pretty much just looks like my channel, right? This area looks really good. This area up here, I don't really want to make lighter. Okay, so how do we actually have this not include that area? Well, masks can be changed at any time. All you have to remember is light areas on a mask will be visible and dark areas will be invisible. So you can make these areas lighter or darker at any point in time, and you can use simple tools. For instance, you can use the brush tool. I'm going to hold Alt or Option and click on my layer mask. Okay, all I have to do is paint black. If I just hit B for the brush tool, and I choose black as my foreground color, and I just paint black right up here. There we go. You can see it just makes that layer not visible right there, and problem solved, right? Let's just hit undo. I'll hold Alt or Option and click on this layer mask so we can see. Okay, it's just a regular black brush. I'm just painting black right here. There we go, because I don't want that area to be brighter. Okay, or maybe I do, but I want to control it separately. Okay, a little smaller brush here. There we go. Okay, now check that out. Just the area that I wanted to be brighter is brighter. And here we go. Just click right back on my layer. And those changes that I wanted to make, I kind of liked what it did for the surrounding rocks also. Okay, so that's why we're leaving them there. Just the areas that we wanted to be a little bit brighter, now they're a little bit brighter. So This is such a fantastic technique because we're really able to just define exactly where we would like to be lighter or darker, and we can just paint on our layer masks at any time. So I know channels are a little bit like heady, so it's kind of a lot to get your head around, but here's how we're going to simplify it. The only thing we're really doing with channels is we're making selections. Okay, that's it. Channels are for selections. And then once we have those selections, we just load those on our layer masks to make layers either visible or not visible. That's it. So channels make selections. Selections go onto your layer masks, and that defines visibility of a layer. That's the whole idea. And that's where this luminosity blending comes in, because we can choose how light or how dark these different areas are going to be by editing our channels. So already we're looking pretty good. Let's go ahead and make these two layers invisible. So there's the before. Okay, you can see we brought in just general information in our darks, and then this wasn't light enough, so then we brought this a little bit lighter, and there we go. We're looking pretty good. I want to see if I can maybe make this area, these dark trees here, I want to see if I can make those just a little bit brighter as well. So let's try it. Okay, now I'm going to make these two layers. You can have them invisible, and then your channels will just represent the image that you see. Or you can put these visible, and then your channels will just represent that image. Okay, so really kind of either way. Okay, and for instance, if I put a big happy face here in green, then red, green. See how the happy face is brighter in the green channel because it's a green happy face, and then blue and red are going to be darker. Okay, so it's literally just everything that is on your image right now. Okay, we don't need that happy face. I'm going to just turn it off, but that's the idea. So let's say if we can brighten up this top left there. We're going to go to our channels, and we're going to start off by looking at our red, green, and blue channels. See if any of them is lighter up there, okay? Because if it is, we want to start there. So let's start by clicking on RGB. Then we click on red, green, and blue. All right, let's just zoom in here. Okay, and it looks like our red channel, there we go, has a little bit more information than the other color channels. Can you see that? Red channel is just a little bit lighter. So let's duplicate that. Now I'm going to hit Control or Command L for our levels. There we go. And let's just take our center point and make that a little bit brighter now. Okay, that looks pretty good. And now let's go ahead and make this into a selection. So we're going to hold Control or Command, click there to make it a selection. Notice it's always going to select out the light areas first. So if you wanted to select the darks, which in this case we do, right? Because the darker areas here, we just go to Select and then down to Inverse. Okay, so now it's going to select the darker areas. So here, now that our darker areas are selected, we can just grab a Curves Adjustment layer. By the way, you can use curves, you can use levels, you can use hue saturation. You can really use anything you want. All we're editing is the layer mask. Let's go ahead and stick with curves because we've been using curves. And we'll just make this a little bit brighter. Okay, so now we can see we've made that area a little bit brighter and we have a little bit more detail. Let's change our blending mode from normal to luminosity, and that's just going to affect lights and darks. So you can see here in normal, okay, see how it's kind of like enhancing some of the, this is just image noise, you know, and especially in your darks, you just get like, you know, these bands of colors. Like you can see there's just a bunch of red and stuff like that in there. Okay, if you just change it from normal to luminosity, you can see it's a much more natural looking color. There we go. Okay, that looks pretty good. Now, like really the thing that I want, like where I want this to be visible, is pretty much like just up there, right? So I hold Alt or Option and take a look at my layer mask. I don't need this to be visible really everywhere, just right up there. And even up there, maybe I want to use levels on this as well. By the way, you can use levels on your layer mask at any time too. So before we used our levels adjustment on the channels before we made a selection, but you can use the levels adjustment on your layer mask after you make a selection too. I really only want this to be visible up here on the top left. So what I'm going to do is, instead of painting black everywhere else, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to group this layer with itself, and then I'm going to put a black layer mask on the group. So hold Alt or Option down and click on your layer mask button, and that just makes a black layer mask. Now the reason I do this, let me go ahead and just right click on this little eyeball and then make it a color so we can see, like, you know, this is a group, and then the only thing in this group is this curve adjustment layer. The reason I do this is because maybe later I want this curves adjustment to be visible somewhere else too. But if I just go ahead and paint black over this whole layer mask, then the deal is if I just paint white, like I'll just show you. Here, let's just click there. Like if I just painted black everywhere else, I was like, you know what, I only want it to be visible there. Okay, cool. So I'm just going to paint black everywhere else. Okay. And then I'm like, you know what, I actually think it could be visible over here, so I'm just going to paint white. But see, the problem is if I just paint white, it doesn't contain the information from my image. This is not luminosity blending. It's just me painting white and black on a layer. Okay? So the reason is look at my layer mask. You know, this contains some information from my image, and that's just me painting white over there. So let's just undo that a couple times. So instead of painting white and black on the layer mask that actually has all the information, if you group it with itself, okay, just group the layer mask with itself, then I can paint white, for instance, where I want it to be visible. Let's just kind of fade that out. There we go. And then maybe I want it to be visible there. And then see, I decide I want it to be visible down there too. And I can kind of just bring some of this information back into the image. There we go. That's kind of nice there, huh? I can bring some of this information back into the image. There we go. And it's going to keep all of this original detail here from the original. Basically, the idea is that if you decide you just want to paint light or black on your layer mask, instead of painting it right on your layer mask, just group the layer with itself and then put a mask on that group and then paint white or black on that. It just makes it much easier. It's a little bit less destructive, and you can always get back to your original layer mask on the layer if you need to. Now getting back into our image, here on the top left, you can see it did a nice job lightening the darks, but it made the light areas a little bit light too. So let's hold Alt or Option and click on my layer mask. And basically what I want to do is I want to take these light areas, maybe make them a little bit lighter, and these dark areas here, I want to make them a little bit darker. Okay? So what we're going to do is I'm going to hit B for the brush tool. Now I'm painting on my layer mask. We're going to change our brush mode to overlay. So if my brush mode is set to overlay and I paint white, it's going to make my lights a little bit lighter. Okay? If I paint black, it's going to make my darks a little bit darker. There we go. But it's kind of leave those lights in place. And that's what I want to do. I want to paint black on here. The reason I just want to make my sky a little bit darker because I don't want this to affect my sky so much. Okay, I wanted to make those trees brighter, but not necessarily the sky. Okay, so I'm just painting black. This overlay blend mode really does the trick, and then I can paint white with overlay blend mode, just like right there. So let's just go back in time here. Just hit undo a bunch. So there's the before. You can see trees are lighter than the sky, but not that much. Okay, and here's the after. You can see just painting black and white on the layer mask itself with an overlay blend mode, which you can do that on your channels as well. You can paint white or black on your channels. Using the overlay blend mode helps, because if it's set to normal, look, it just does that, right? It doesn't take into account the image itself. So overlay blend mode, kind of like a hidden little secret. Okay, let's see how that looks. So now you can see we're brightening up those trees because there were, you know, the darker areas there. Okay, we're brightening up those trees, and the sky is pretty much staying where it is, staying alone. Staying alone. That doesn't make any sense. It's it's not being affected. All right, next let's go ahead. I want to take a look at these greens here, see if we can affect these greens. So we'll go to our channels, because we've been using this luminosity blending a lot for like light levels, but you can also work on colors. So let's go ahead and click on red, green, and blue. There we go. And green has the greatest amount of contrast. Not as much as I would love, you know, like ideally all of this would be like super dark and just the green would be bright. It's not the case, but at least we do have some contrast we can work with. So let's go ahead and duplicate our green channel. Let's hit Control or Command L. I'm just going to make my darks a little bit darker. Okay. There we go. And that's looking pretty good there. So you can see there's a nice contrast between light and dark. This contrast is really what we're looking for, because without the contrast, it's pretty much just the same thing as making a whole area lighter and darker. But when you have contrast, you know, your darks and your lights, when you have this contrast, that means you're going to select the lighter areas and not select the darker areas. So you can actually like add interesting contrast to your image. Okay, and that's the whole idea behind luminosity blending, right? It's not just like make it all lighter or make it darker. It's like I want my darks in this area to be a little bit lighter. I want my lights in this area to be a little bit darker. That's the idea. So we're going to do with color here. So let's go ahead and hit OK. Control or Command, let's make this into a selection. Again, with channels it selects everything, okay? But that's not really a big deal. It's just going to go on a layer mask, right? So I'm going to just affect this area, but it's, you know, we'll just mask out everything else. So we have our selection. Let's go ahead and grab a hue/saturation adjustment layer. Okay? And just like always, if you have a selection and you create an adjustment layer, it's going to load that selection into the layer mask. So here we have already in our layer mask waiting for us. So let's hold Alt or Option. There we go. There's our layer mask. Okay, so with this hue/saturation, I can do things like increase my saturation. But as you can see, it's only increasing the saturation of like the lighter areas, right? Okay, it's because of this contrast, right? Like this area is not visible, this area is visible. Okay, that's a very different thing. Let me just paint white over here just to show you. Like if you just did that, made it visible everywhere, that's what it would look like, right? So it's a very different thing. We're just kind of pulling in some of that color there. Now, we can kind of choose, obviously, like doesn't look great on the image as a whole, but in a couple little areas, maybe that's kind of nice. Okay, maybe let's just double click here. We'll just lower our saturation just a little bit. Okay, and we can kind of choose where we want some of this saturation to go. Okay, so to do that, I'm going to group this layer with itself because we decided to work on the greens, and that is nice, but some of this blue is actually kind of nice too, right? So let's go ahead and I'm going to group this layer with itself. I'm going to hold Alt or Option and click on the layer mask. That just makes a black layer mask. Saves you a step. Instead of creating a layer mask and then inverting it, just hold Alt or Option, makes a black layer mask. So brush tool, we're going to paint white on our layer mask with our brush tool, especially over these greens. See that? We're just able to make those greens really shine through. Okay, they were getting a little bit lost before. So we're able to make those greens show up a little bit more. Let's choose a large brush and then like maybe a 10% flow. So it's just like going to be real nice and subtle here. There we go. We'll just bring it in a little bit right there towards the center. Okay, I think we could even have a little bit more. Okay, so again, I'm just painting on this layer mask. Let's go ahead and I'm going to right click here. Let's make that orange so we can see. I'm just painting on this layer mask, but really this layer mask is just defining what's in here, and this is being defined by the fancy layer mask that we made. Okay, so we're editing color, but that's a very different thing. We'll just do it one more time just so you see. Let's just grab a hue saturation. We'll just crank this up, invert the layer mask, and then like paint white like where we would, you know, kind of like where we did before. Just paint white like over here. Okay, so this is what it looks like when you just create a regular hue saturation adjustment layer and just like make it visible. You can see, okay, it's just kind of visible everywhere. I paint. Okay, and it's enhancing a lot of the like reds. And in this case, this is a compressed JPEG. That's a stock image, by the way. There's artifacts, okay? So like all these little red things, that's JPEG compression. But it further enhances what we're talking about here, because you can see all this is getting enhanced there. And just kind of like a big blob of saturation, whereas this, you can see, is much more subtle. It's just getting the greens, it's getting a little bit of those blues, and the image as a whole looks much more natural. See, this is with our luminosity blending, and then here's this, just looks like, bah, saturation, and this is like, oh, nice and subtle. Okay, so that's kind of like the deal there, for a lack of a better word. That's the deal. All right, let's go ahead. I'm going to paint black on here, on this. There we go. I didn't want it to show up here as much. There we go. And let's paint some black on the mask right there also. That's looking pretty good. So these layers down here, I'm going to just shift click and then hit the delete button because we don't actually need them. Let's go ahead and take a look at our before and after. So there's the before. You can see we have a lot of dark information here. Like I can't really even tell, like here and here, like in up here, I can't even see any information there. So we worked on adding some information from our darks. We did some more like pop the highlights. You can see these highlights, see how it gives a little bit more contrast to the rocks? It gives them like a little bit more definition, which is really nice. Added some more dark areas, just like really filling in those darks, and then some color. So there's the before and the after. You can see the after is just, it's just a much more rich image. In my opinion, you don't really want any part of your image to be like dark to the point where you like don't have any information. In a photograph like this, like I like to be able to see the information that's there. Now, again, of course you could always combine these effects together. Like if, you know, let's go to our red, green, and blue. Let's go to our blue channel. Let's make this a selection. I'm going to create a curves adjustment layer, make it a little bit darker. Keep in mind I selected the lighter areas. So I'm going to invert my layer mask. Control Command I. Okay. If I wanted my darks to be a little bit darker, I can still do that after the fact, but they're going to be a little bit more uniform now. Okay. And even though I did make my darks a little bit darker, I still have all this information. Like I can still see everything here, right? Like that's much different from this, right? That information is there, and I can kind of do with it whatever I feel works the best for this image. Let's maybe make that a little bit brighter. There we go. And that is using our curves adjustment. Let's just go ahead and group these one more time. I'm going to hit F for full screen. There's the before and the after using channels to make selections, and then those selections go on your layer masks for luminosity blending. At this point, we've taken a look at blend if sliders, we've taken a look at apply image, and we've taken a look at channels, and you can most definitely use all three of those in an image. You can use all three of those even on a single layer. You can always combine these techniques. So whichever technique works better for you, that's the technique that I would recommend going with. Now, the blend if sliders are, I think, probably like the easiest to use. You can just see that it's very straightforward. But in my opinion, they are a little bit less accurate than channels or apply image. So if you're using blend if and you're like, you know what, this isn't getting, it's just not blending in exactly like how I would want, then I would recommend switching to either apply image or channels. Both of those are really great ways to take the image itself and apply that to a layer mask. So really these are kind of interchangeable. You'll find that some work better in different situations, but they will all help you with luminosity blending, and they will all help you improve your images. Thank you so much. We'll see you in the next chapter where we've got some great examples using luminosity blending. All right, Learn you later. Bye, everyone.